I got into my dream college, but my stepdad tried to steal my late father's college fund, and my mom shockingly took his side, leaving me to fight alone. I, a 20-year-old male, need to get this massive weight off my chest. I've been holding on to this story for a while, and after everything that's happened recently, I think it's time to share. Fair warning, this is going to be a long one. Also, I'm using my alternate account because some people involved follow my main. First, you need to understand where I came from to grasp where this whole mess started. My dad was an absolute legend of a software engineer, one of those early 2000 tech pioneers who got in when the industry was really taking off. He worked at one of the big tech companies. I can't say which one for privacy reasons, but think Facebook, Amazon, or Google level. But here's the thing. He wasn't one of those stereotypical absent workaholic Silicon Valley dads you hear about. I have a vivid memory from when I was around 10. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening, and Dad had just gotten home after a 12-hour day dealing with a major production crisis. He looked absolutely wrecked, the kind of tired where you can barely keep your eyes open. But there I was, stuck on algebra homework due the next day. Instead of crashing on the couch, which he honestly deserved, this man sat down with me for an hour, explained the concepts, and even turned it into a mini lesson about how algebra is like coding variables. That was just who he was, always investing in my future. Always making time. We had this old, beaten-up ThinkPad that he'd saved from the company's e-waste program. Every weekend, he'd teach me basic programming on it. He started me with Scratch when I was about 8, moved up to Python by the time I was 11. He'd make these little coding challenges for me, turning them into games. Looking back, I realized he was giving me a computer science education before I even hit middle school. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We lived in a nice suburb outside Boston, in a good school district, the whole deal. Mom was a high school English teacher. She still is, actually, but we'll get to that later. We had this perfect little unit going. Mom would grade papers at the kitchen table. Dad would teach me coding on the ThinkPad, and we'd order pizza every Friday night and watch sci-fi movies, Star Wars, Star Trek, Blade Runner. Dad was a massive nerd and proud of it. Then everything went to hell. It started with Dad having weird stomach pains. He brushed it off at first. Typical guy move, right? But Mom insisted he get it checked out. That's when we got the news that still haunts me, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. If you know anything about cancer, you know that's basically a death sentence. The doctors gave him 6 to 12 months. He made it 6. Even while he was dying, this man was still thinking ahead. He'd already set up a college fund for me years ago, but now he went into overdrive with the planning. He got everything legally, locked down tight, trust fund, life insurance, everything organized down to the last detail. He even wrote a letter to me that I wasn't supposed to open until I got into college. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. The last real conversation I had with him was in the hospital. He could barely talk at that point, but he grabbed my hand and made me promise 2 things. 1, that I'd never stop learning, and 2, that I'd take care of Mom. I was 12, trying to act tough, but absolutely breaking inside. After he passed, things were rough for a while. Mom took a leave of absence from teaching, and I threw myself into studying. It was like, if I couldn't have my dad physically there teaching me anymore, I could at least honor him by learning everything I could. I started teaching myself more advanced programming, stayed after school for extra math help, and joined every academic club I could find. Looking back, it was probably my way of dealing with grief, but hey, at least it was productive. We managed okay for those first few years. The life insurance meant we could keep the house, and Mom eventually went back to teaching. We had a new routine, just the 2 of us. She'd help me with English essays. I'd help her figure out how to use Google Classroom. Seriously, how do teachers struggle so much with tech? It wasn't the same as before, but we were making it work. Then Mom met Mark, and holy hell, did that ever change everything. Mom met Mark about 3 years after Dad passed. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags, but at the time, I was just a 15-year-old kid trying to deal with some random dude suddenly inserted into our lives. They met through a local Facebook group for single parents. Yeah, I know, already suspicious. Mark owned a car dealership in town, one of those buy here, pay here places that prey on people with bad credit. He talked a big game about being an entrepreneur and a self-made man, but honestly, the place looked shadier than a palm tree in Antarctica, the kind of spot where odometers mysteriously roll back, and the finance terms are written in font size .5. The first time I met him, he showed up at our house in a leased BMW. Found out later he was 3 months behind on payments, wearing one of those tacky Omega watches you can spot as fake from a mile away. But Mom, man, she ate it all up. She'd been lonely, teaching all day, coming home to just me and my textbooks. Mark swooped in with his charming businessman act, taking her to fancy restaurants and buying her flowers. Classic love-bombing stuff that I didn't have the life experience to recognize back then. But the real cherry on top of this sundae was his son, Randy. Holy hell, where do I even start with Randy? Imagine every douchebag high school movie character rolled into one person, then subtract about 50 IQ points. Randy was a year older than me, but had already been held back twice. He'd walk around in designer clothes his dad bought him, probably with money from scamming people at the dealership, acting like he was some suburban Tony Montana. His Instagram bio literally said future CEO, even though the only thing he'd ever successfully managed was avoiding getting a job. Mark moved in with us after dating Mom for like 6 months. 6 months, and suddenly I'm sharing my house with these two clowns. Randy got the guest room, which was right next to mine, and that's when the real fun began. This dude would blast his terrible SoundCloud rapper wannabe music at 2 o'clock in the morning when I was trying to study. He'd go through my stuff when I wasn't home. I found him wearing one of my dad's old MIT hoodies once and nearly lost my mind. But the worst part was how he acted around my female friends. Quick example, my friend Sarah, not her real name, came over to work on a coding project. Randy spent the entire time lurking, making gross comments, and later spread rumors at school that she was easy. I had to stop having friends over because of his creepy behavior. Mark wasn't any better as a stepdad. He tried to give me these condescending life advice sessions, usually starting with, "Now, son." I shut that son nonsense down real quick, told him straight up that I already had a dad, and he wasn't him. His favorite topic was how college is a scam and how I should learn real-world business from him instead. Yeah, because your dying car dealership is totally the Harvard Business School of the real world, Mark. The worst part was watching Mom change. She used to be this strong, independent woman who taught her students about feminist literature and standing up for themselves. But around Mark, she turned into a completely different person, constantly seeking his approval, laughing at his stupid jokes, and making excuses for his and Randy's behavior. I tried to talk to her about it once, showed her the Better Business Bureau complaints about Mark's dealership, and told her about Randy's creepy behavior. You know what she said? "We need to give them a chance. Mark's had a hard life, and Randy just needs a mother's influence." Like, what about me, hard life? What about the fact that I lost my dad, and now had to watch this discount Jordan Belfort wannabe take over our home? The dynamic in the house got real weird, real fast. Mark and Randy would have these loud conversations about hustling and grinding, their favorite words, usually involving some sketchy scheme or another. Meanwhile, I'm in my room actually grinding, studying, coding, trying to maintain my 4.0 GPA. The contrast was almost comical. Oh, and get this, Mark started reorganizing our family finances about a month after moving in. He started asking Mom about her savings, my college fund, everything. He had this whole pitch about how he could invest it in his business and triple our money. Classic conman stuff. Thank God Dad had the foresight to lock down my college fund in a trust, or it probably would have disappeared, faster than my respect for Mom's judgment. The real kicker? Mom started pulling away from everything that connected us to Dad. His books disappeared from the living room shelves. His old MIT sweatshirt that she used to wear around the house? Suddenly nowhere to be found. It was like she was trying to erase our past to make room for this new family. Looking back, I should have seen what was coming. The way Mark would get this calculating look in his eyes whenever the topic of my future came up. The way Randy would make snide comments about me being a tryhard whenever I aced a test. They were laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the biggest betrayal of my life. While Mark and Randy were turning our house into their personal circus, I was on my own mission. Looking back, I probably took the whole grinding thing to an unhealthy level, but man, when you've got a dream and a toxic home environment, you'll do anything to make it happen. My daily routine was insane. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to avoid running into Randy and Mark in the kitchen. Nothing kills your appetite like watching Randy shovel Lucky Charms into his face while bragging about his latest business idea, which usually involved drop shipping fake Supreme merch or whatever get-rich-quick scheme he'd found on TikTok that week. First period started at 7:30, but I'd get to school by 6:45 to use the computer lab. Our school's computers were ancient, but they were better than trying to code at home, where Randy would constantly interrupt me with his nonsense. Plus, the early morning quiet helped me focus. The janitor, Mr. Rodriguez, would always let me in early. Shout out to that man. He'd even bring me coffee sometimes when he saw me struggling with particularly nasty debugging sessions. My course load was pretty much academic suicide, AP Computer Science, AP Calculus BC, AP Physics C, AP Language, you name it. The guidance counselor actually tried to talk me out of it, said it was too much pressure. But pressure? That was nothing compared to listening to Mark's daily lectures about how book smarts don't equal street smarts while he ran his dealership into the ground. The real tough part was balancing everything with SAT prep. I couldn't afford those fancy prep courses the rich kids at my school were taking, so I basically lived at the public library. They had old SAT prep books from like 2015, but hey, math is math, right? I'd study there until closing time just to avoid going home. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, would sometimes forget to announce closing time when she saw me deep in practice problems. Again, shout out to all the adults who saw what was going on and tried to help in their own ways. My SAT score started out decent but not great, 1380 on my first practice test. Not bad, but not Ivy League material. So I doubled down, started doing marathon study sessions on weekends. I'd take a practice test, review every single question I got wrong, and make flashcards for every vocabulary word I didn't know. By my final SAT, I hit 1580. When I got the score back, I literally cried in the school bathroom for like 20 minutes. The whole time, Randy would make snide comments about me being a tryhard or a teacher's pet. He was probably jealous, but honestly, I didn't care. Every time he or Mark tried to get under my skin, I'd think about my dad's MIT graduation photo and keep pushing. The extracurriculars were another level of crazy. Besides the coding club, I was on the debate team, team captain by junior year, volunteering at a local tech literacy program for seniors, teaching old folks how to avoid online scams. Ironically, I learned a lot about scams from watching Mark's business practices and working part-time at a local computer repair shop. Mom, well, she tried to be supportive in her own way. She'd leave dinner in the microwave for me when I got home late from activities. Sometimes she'd try to talk to me about college plans, but Mark would always interrupt with some story about a self-made millionaire he knew who never went to college. It was like watching someone you love slowly disappear into someone else's shadow. The worst part, I was killing myself trying to make this dream happen while Randy was literally doing nothing. Like, actually nothing. He dropped out of community college after 3 weeks, claiming the professors were haters who didn't understand his entrepreneurial mindset. He spent his days either sleeping or hanging out at his dad's dealership, allegedly learning the business. The business of what? Running a failing car lot into the ground while scamming people? Great career path. But you know what kept me going? Those quiet moments in the morning, coding in the computer lab, when I could almost feel my dad's presence, like he was looking over my shoulder, proud of what I was building. Every line of code, every solved math problem, every perfect test score, they were all building blocks for my escape plan. Then came the college applications, and holy hell, did that ever open a whole new can of worms. March 28, 2023. I remember the date because it was the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday, around 6:30 in the evening. I was in my usual spot at the public library, trying to focus on AP Physics homework, but really just obsessively, refreshing my email every 30 seconds. Ivy Day decisions were dropping, and my stomach felt like it was hosting an Olympic gymnastics competition. I'd applied to 7 schools total, 3 safety schools, already got into 3 target schools, got into 2, and my dream school. I'm trying to stay anonymous here, but let's just say it's one of those places where the acceptance rate is lower than Randy's GPA. Their computer science program is consistently ranked in the top 3 nationally, and their graduates basically get to print their own job offers. So I'm sitting there sweating bullets when the email notification pops up. The subject line just says, "Update on your application status." My hands were shaking so bad, I misclicked twice before managing to open it. Then I saw those magic words, "Congratulations." I had to read it 5 times to believe it was real. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, probably thought I was having a seizure or something because I sat there completely frozen for a solid minute. Then the first started. Crying, not subtle manly tears, but full-on ugly crying in the middle of the reference section. Mrs. Chen came over to check if I was okay, and when I showed her the email, she hugged me and started crying a little herself. She'd seen how hard I'd worked, staying there until closing time, almost every day, for 2 years straight. She told me she was going to frame the newspaper article when I eventually won my Nobel Prize. No pressure, right? I called Mom first. She was still at school, grading papers in her classroom. When I told her, she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said she was coming home right away to celebrate. For a moment, just a moment, it felt like old times, like when I'd won the state science fair in middle school and Dad had taken us all out for ice cream. I got home around 7:30 and Mom was already there. She'd bought champagne, the cheap stuff but still, and was literally dancing around the kitchen. She kept hugging me and saying how proud Dad would be. It was perfect. I should have known it wouldn't last. Mark and Randy got home around 8. They'd been at the dealership, probably trying to figure out how to make a Honda Civic with 200,000 miles look like it had only been gently used by a little old lady for church on Sundays. Mom was mid-happy dance when they walked in, and I swear, the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Mark did this thing where he tries to look concerned but just ends up looking constipated. He asked me when I'd applied, how much it would cost. All these questions that had nothing to do with actually congratulating me. I explained about my dad's college fund, thinking that would settle it. Big mistake. Mark's face did this weird twitch thing. He looked at Mom and said, "Oh, that money," like he'd been thinking about my college fund for a while. Which, looking back, he probably had. Then he started in with this nonsense about how I should have looped them in on my plans because apparently I needed their permission to apply to college. Randy, being the emotional support douchebag that he is, started going on about how unfair it was that I was showing off when he chose to go to community college for 3 weeks. Because remember, he understands the value of starting small. This, coming from the guy who once tried to convince Mark to buy him a Tesla because, and I quote, "It's an investment in my personal brand." But the real gut punch came later that night. Mom came to my room around midnight looking like she'd been crying. She said we needed to talk, those 3 words that never lead to anything good. Turns out, Mark had been planning to use my college fund to expand the dealership. He had a whole presentation ready about how he could triple the money in 2 years. Mom had apparently been stalling him, saying they needed to wait for the right time. But now that I'd actually gotten into somewhere, the crap was hitting the fan. Mark had given her an ultimatum. Either convince me to reconsider my college choice and let him invest the money, or he had some choice words about their marriage. And Mom, my own mother, was sitting there asking me to think about the family. What family? The one where my stepdad was trying to steal my dead father's last gift to me, where my stepbrother spent his days making TikToks about being a future millionaire while contributing nothing to society. That family? I showed Mom the letter Dad had written me, the one I was supposed to open when I got into college. In it, he talked about how proud he was, how he knew I'd do great things, how the money he'd saved was his way of making sure I could chase my dreams without worrying about debt. Mom read it, cried some more, but still insisted we needed to find a compromise. That's when I realized this wasn't just about college anymore. This was about choosing between my dad's dreams for me and my mom's new life, between my future and Mark's latest get-rich-quick scheme, between who I wanted to be and who they wanted me to become. And let me tell you, what happened next makes Game of Thrones look like a kindergarten playground dispute. The morning after my acceptance, I woke up to find Mark sitting at our kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him, like he was about to conduct a corporate board meeting. Mom was there too, looking like she hadn't slept at all, nervously fiddling with her coffee mug, the one my dad had gotten her from MIT's campus store years ago. The sight of that mug in this context made my stomach turn. Mark had prepared an actual PowerPoint presentation. I wish I was joking. This man really made a slideshow titled Family Financial Planning, a strategic approach to collective success. Looking back, I have to admire the sheer audacity of trying to corporate speak his way into stealing my college fund. The presentation was exactly what you'd expect from someone who learned business strategy from YouTube motivational speakers. Lots of clip art, graphs showing exponential growth, buzzwords like synergy and market penetration, and absolutely zero actual financial data to back up his claims. His big plan? Use my college fund to buy a second dealership location that was going out of business, because clearly the solution to running one failing business is to buy another one. I sat there for 30 minutes, watching this man explain how he could turn my father's carefully saved money into a family empire. Every slide felt like a personal insult to my dad's memory. The worst part was watching Mom nod along, occasionally throwing in supportive comments like, "Mark really knows the market, and it's a great opportunity for all of us." When he finally finished, Mark leaned back in his chair with this smug look, like he'd just presented the next Amazon business model. Then he hit me with the kicker, so sport. He always called me that when he was trying to be manipulative. "What do you think about taking a gap year? Give the business time to grow. Then we can talk about college again." I lost it, like completely lost it. I told him exactly what I thought about his business acumen. How I'd looked up his dealership's Better Business Bureau rating, an F, by the way. How I knew about the complaints filed against him for odometer fraud. How his current location was 3 months behind on rent. Thank God for public records and that business law elective I took. Mark's face went through a fascinating journey from smug to shocked to angry. Randy, who'd been lurking in the doorway this whole time, started getting all puffed up, like he was going to do something, but I wasn't done. I pulled out my phone and showed them the email I'd gotten from my dad's lawyer the night before. Yeah, I'd contacted him right after Mom's midnight visit. I wasn't born yesterday. The lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. The trust was ironclad. Mark had no legal right to touch that money, and any attempt to coerce me or Mom into signing it over could be considered criminal. That's when things got ugly. Mark started yelling about how I was tearing this family apart with my selfish attitude. Rich words from a guy trying to steal a dead man's savings from his kid. Randy joined in, calling me every name in the book. Mom just sat there, tears running down her face, occasionally mumbling something about finding a compromise. I looked at her and said something I still think about sometimes. Mom, what would Dad think if he could see you right now? The silence that followed was deafening. Mark made his final play. He turned to Mom and said, "It's time to make a choice. Either your son learns to be a team player or—" He let the threat hang there, but we all knew what he meant. Mom stood up slowly, and for a second, just a second, I thought she was finally going to stand up to him. Instead, she looked at me with sad eyes and said, "Maybe we could look at some schools closer to home, something more affordable." That was it. That was the moment I knew it was over. Not just my dream of going to my dad's alma mater, but my relationship with my mom as I knew it. She'd chosen Mark, chosen the illusion of security he provided over her own son's future. I went up to my room and started packing. Not everything. I wasn't stupid enough to let them know I was leaving for good. Just the essentials, my laptop, some clothes, Dad's MIT sweatshirt, and most importantly, all my important documents I'd already gathered. Birth certificate, social security card, etc. Again, not my first rodeo. I called my best friend, Jake, whose parents had always treated me like a second son. They didn't even hesitate, said I could stay with them as long as I needed. Jake's dad, a retired Marine who'd seen enough abuse in his time to recognize it, just said, "Pack your stuff, son. We've got a spare room." The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, bank visits, and paperwork. Mom kept trying to reason with me, alternating between guilt trips, "How could you do this to me?" and promises that we can work this out as a family. Mark oscillated between threats and fake attempts at reconciliation. Randy just glared at me whenever our paths crossed, probably realizing his dad's meal ticket was walking out the door. But you know what the craziest part was? In the midst of all this chaos, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. I wasn't just fighting for my college fund anymore. I was fighting for my dad's legacy, for my future, and most importantly, for myself. The day I finally left, I took one last look at my mom. She was standing in the doorway, crying, begging me to stay. Mark was behind her, trying to look concerned but probably already calculating how to spin this to the neighbors. I just said, "Dad would be disappointed," and walked away. You know those movies where the main character gets into their dream school, and suddenly everything's perfect? Yeah, real life doesn't work that way. Those first few months were some of the toughest of my life. Moving into my dorm was weird. While other kids had their whole families helping them unpack, taking photos, crying about their babies, growing up, I had Jake and his parents. Don't get me wrong, they were amazing, but watching other families say goodbye hit different. Mom had texted, asking if she could come. I left her on read. Then there was Sarah. Different Sarah from high school. Keeping names changed. I met her in linear algebra. She's this absolute genius who could explain the most complex math concepts like she was teaching kindergarten. We started dating second semester. She was the first person I told the whole story to about Mom, Mark, everything. She just listened, didn't judge, then helped me write a sorting algorithm at 3 o'clock in the morning because that's what I needed to distract myself. But life has a way of not letting you forget your past. Mom kept trying to reach out, birthday cards, Christmas cards, random texts asking how I was doing. Most went unanswered. The few times I did reply, it was just, "I'm fine," or "thanks." Each message felt like picking at a scab that wasn't quite healed. Then came internship season. Landing a FANG internship is like trying to win the lottery while solving a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. But somehow, I did it. Got the offer email during my algorithms class. The salary was more than Mark probably made in 3 months at his dealership. Found out later through Jake's mom that Mark's dealership had finally gone under. Apparently, he tried to pull some shady financing that backfired spectacularly. Randy was working at a vape shop, still talking about being a future entrepreneur. Mom was still teaching, but things with Mark were tense. The internship itself? Freaking incredible. I spent the summer building actual products that millions of people would use. My team lead was this veteran engineer who reminded me so much of Dad. Same passion for mentoring, same terrible dad jokes. On my last day, he pulled me aside and offered me a return offer for after graduation. The compensation package made my eyes water. That night, Mom texted, congratulating me on the offer. Turns out my project manager knew her through some teaching connection and had mentioned my performance. She said she wanted to visit to make things right, said she had things she needed to tell me. I stared at that text for hours. Part of me wanted to ignore it like all the others, but another part remembered that little kid who used to grade papers with her at the kitchen table, who'd help her figure out how to use Google Classroom, who just wanted his mom back. I finally replied, okay, but we meet on my terms. Her response came seconds later. Anything you want. I just want to see you. Life has a way of bringing things full circle. 4 years after I'd walked away from home with nothing but a backpack and a dream, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop near my apartment, waiting for my mom. The same mom who'd chosen her failing marriage over my future, who tried to convince me to give up my dreams for Mark's schemes. I'd picked this spot carefully. Neutral ground, public enough to keep things civil, private enough for real talk. Plus, their iced coffee is actually decent. Sarah had offered to stick around nearby just in case, but this was something I needed to handle alone. When Mom walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She'd lost weight, looked older somehow. Gone was the confident high school teacher I remembered. The woman approaching my table looked beaten down. She was wearing Dad's old MIT Parents Weekend sweatshirt, the one I thought Mark had thrown out years ago. The first few minutes were awkward as hell, small talk about the weather, how my classes were going, typical mom stuff. But there was this underlying tension, like we were both tiptoeing around a minefield of unspoken words. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, Mark left me. Not exactly shocking news. Jake's mom had kept me updated on the neighborhood gossip. Apparently, after the dealership went bankrupt, Mark had tried to start some cryptocurrency scheme. Because of course, he did. When that failed, he'd split, leaving Mom with a mountain of debt and a broken marriage. But then she dropped the real bombshell. He never wanted to invest your college money in the business, she said, staring into her coffee. He wanted to use it to pay off gambling debts. The dealership was just a front. He'd been borrowing from some dangerous people. The pieces started falling into place. The constant pressure about the money, the desperate schemes, the way he'd almost panicked when I got accepted to college. Mark hadn't just been a failed businessman. He'd been running a whole other kind of operation. Mom started crying, not the manipulative tears I'd seen before, but real, raw sobs. She told me everything, how Mark had threatened her when she wouldn't sign over my trust fund, how he'd been stealing money from the dealership, how Randy had been involved in some seriously sketchy stuff at that garage of his. I was scared, she said, not just of Mark, but of being alone after your father died. I thought I'd never find anyone else. Mark seemed so capable at first. By the time I realized what he really was, I was in too deep. But that's no excuse for what I did to you. I sat there, processing everything. Part of me wanted to stay angry, to remind her of every time she'd chosen Mark over me. But looking at her now, I saw something I'd missed before, the same loss and loneliness I'd felt all these years. I found this when I was packing up Mark's things, she said, pulling out a worn envelope. Inside was a letter from Dad, dated a week before he died. He'd written it to Mom, asking her to protect my future, to make sure I had the chances he'd worked so hard to provide. She'd never shown it to Mark. I failed him, she whispered. I failed both of you. That's when I did something I hadn't done in 4 years. I reached across the table and took my mom's hand. You didn't fail, I said. You're here now. We talked for hours, real talk, not the surface-level stuff from her texts and calls. She told me about going to therapy, about rebuilding her life post-Mark. I told her about college, about Sarah, about the job offer. For the first time since Dad died, it felt like we were actually seeing each other. Then I asked her something that had been bugging me for years. Why didn't you fight harder for me when I left? She squeezed my hand and said, because you reminded me so much of your father. He never compromised on what was right, even when it was hard. When you stood up to Mark, I saw him in you. I knew you'd be okay. But you weren't, I said. No, she admitted. But I am now, and I'd like to be part of your life again if you'll let me. That's when I told her my news. I'd just closed on a small house near my new job. Nothing fancy, but it had a spare room. It's yours if you want it, I said. Fresh start. She started crying again, but this time with a smile. She pulled out her phone and showed me something she'd been taking online coding classes. Thought it was time I learned what all the fuss was about, she said. Maybe you could help me sometime. Just like that, something clicked back into place. Not the same as before, too much had happened for that. But something new, something honest. We're still working on it. Mom moved in last month. She's got a teaching job at a school nearby, and in the evenings I help her with her coding homework. Sometimes when we're both up late working, it feels almost like those nights back in high school, grading papers and debugging together. Last week, she hung Dad's MIT graduation photo in her new room. Next to it, she put my college acceptance letter, a reminder, she said, of what happens when you believe in yourself. As for Mark and Randy, last I heard, they're running some sketchy NFT scheme in Florida. Good riddance. Sarah thinks I'm crazy for giving Mom another chance. Maybe I am, but you know what? Sometimes the hardest problems don't have clean, elegant solutions, like in coding.